Good afternoon and welcome to the sixth episode in our Catalyst for Change series. This is an important discussion, and I think that that one that will continue on in this series and others as well. I'm John Jacobs, I'm your host, and we have a great session for you today, some great panelists, importantly. I'll do as I do with each of these, and I'll take you through some quick stats to give context to our discussion for today. So let me just do that. Oh, before I forget, which I always seem to do, we are taking questions. So if you have questions, at the bottom of your nav bar, there's a nav bar at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and just post those questions, and we'll answer those questions after we have a bit of a panel discussion. So let me go ahead and share a screen through the magic of technology. Just one moment, please. And okie dokie. Great. So, catalyst for change: how companies turn disruption into success. This episode is entitled "How Diversity Makes Businesses Stronger." So, here are those quick stats I mentioned, and these are just sourced publicly. So, feel free to go and read the articles that are related to them. Companies with diverse management teams performed 19% better than non-diverse management teams. This is from BCG Boston Consulting back in 2018. Racially and ethnically diverse management teams outperformed industry norms, as according to their industry, by 35%. That's from McKinsey. Decision-making by diverse teams outperformed those made by individuals 87% of the time, which is a staggering number. 67% of job seekers said a diverse work environment was an important part of their decision-making to join a company. Companies with high diversity scores derive 45% of revenue from innovative products and services, while less diverse organizations, sort of average diversity scores, only derive about 26% of their revenue from new services and new products. Despite all of this, as a stat I actually had in the summary as well, white males make 85.8% of Fortune 500 companies in 2020. This is down only slightly from 20 years earlier, where it was 96% of the Fortune 500 CEOs. We have a great panel for you today, and I look forward to hearing from them. Dr. Tawana Burrows, President of Coach Diversity Institute, Alfredo Aldor, CEO and President of ALD and Associates, and Sheila Dixon, Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Black Chamber of Commerce. And I'll stop sharing now, and we can actually begin our discussion. Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Great seeing you all. Let me go ahead and just give a little more background on our panelists, if I may. Dr. Tawana Burrows is president of Coach Diversity Institute, as well as a best-selling author, trainer, and ICF professional certified coach. Tawana's mission is to empower diverse communities through executive coaching. Coach Diversity delivers training and curriculum for to-be coaches and customized diversity and leadership programs for corporate and individual clients. Tawana holds a PhD in education from the University of Pennsylvania, an MS in education from the University of Pennsylvania, a PhD in divinity from Eldon Solutions College of Ministry, and her BS she earned in chemistry at Howard University. Aldor is CEO, President of ALD and Associates, a consulting firm with a mission to increase racial equity in organizations. He is responsible for implementing solutions and developing initiatives that increase organizations' goals and efficiencies. Al retired as a lieutenant colonel with the Army National Guard in 2013 after 28 years of service. Al is an experienced educator, facilitator, trainer who works with individuals, communities, and organizations to address and dismantle racially based inequalities by transforming their beliefs, assumptions, and behaviors. Al holds a BS in psychology from Washington State University and MBA from the National Graduate School, and Al is also an adjunct faculty at George Mason University. Sheila Dixon, Executive Director of the Virginia Black Chamber of Commerce. Sheila is a community outreach and marketing advocate driving impact for social change in Northern Virginia. Throughout her experience in the nonprofit sector, she assists organizations to enhance their community engagement objectives. Sheila has assisted more than 2,000 businesses and nonprofit business owners. And Sheila is a graduate of Duquesne University up in Pittsburgh. I think that's right, Sheila. Is that right? Is that where we're keeping Duquesne? With a BS in business and psychology. Okay, that was long, but I wanted to make sure you folks understood the quality of panelists we have in this discussion today and their deep backgrounds. So as you all know in the audience, if you've watched these videos, these webinars before, we want to have as robust a panel discussion as possible, but necessarily I'm forced to throw a question to somebody first, and that person is Tawana. Tawana, when we think about organizations, how does someone know that an organization values diversity?
Thank you, John. One, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. And it's always a pleasure to be with my colleagues, Al and Sheila again. I can tell you, John, when it comes to knowing if you are valuing diversity as a leader in your organization, like anything else, when you look at what you value, it's a reflection of what you've invested in. Okay, so I'm investing in things that matter to me as a leader, but I'm also investing in things that matter to the people that are part of the organization. So if you look at your balance spreadsheets, you look at the level of efforts that you put into an organization by category, whether it's marketing, whether it's operations, whether it's education and professional development for your people, where you spend the most time is what you value. So I would say that a way you look at how you're valuing diversity is to be able to see how much time and effort and energy and resources are you putting in towards paying attention to the need to be more diverse in a 21st century marketplace. And what you define as diversity is the tricky question. How do you define it will be a reflection on how it looks to the organization and the people looking at your organization.
And that you sort of segue to the next question, which is great. And the question is this, so I built it in sort of this stultifying way, but essentially, how should, diversity takes many forms, right? Gender, age, race, faith, sexual orientation, cultural background, et cetera, nationality for that matter. How should it be determined or judged?
Right.
Diversity.
All right. So there's a few things I want to do is kind of pause around how we qualify the word diversity and what does that look like and mean, right? So you named a whole lot of things in diversity, and that's super important. And we're thinking about all the things that are seen to the naked eye and the unseen in diversity. Typically, organizations are paying attention to those things that are seen, right? Race, ethnicity, gender. When we talk about what we are judging, I want to actually take it a little deeper and use a new word or introduce a new word, and that's inclusion. The question more so is not about how you're judging if you have enough people that are different from you, but more so those that you have that are different from you within your organization. Do they feel included? And are you leading them inclusively so that you get the best of their skills, gifts, and talents organizationally, right? Because if you're not using them in their like I would say in their gifts and talents, and you're not observing their gifts and talents despite the diversity, you are not receiving a return on your investment from that talent you've hired. So I would like to take a step out of it and say, let's look at how I judge how I am leading inclusively, because most organizations today have a lot of gender diversity, if I may say, may not have a lot of ethnic or race diversity, but at a minimum, there's a lot of gender diversity. So when you look at that as a judgment, okay, I have diversity, box check, I'm okay. But what about how are they included if that is the extent of your diversity? And I know Al could speak to that as well.
And and that inclusion piece is so important, Dr. Burrows, and thank you. And I'm happy to be here with everyone today, is when we talk about the inclusion piece and we talk about what's really important and how we define it, an organization's ability to engage their organization and get and leverage the power of their people and the power of their knowledge is critical and vital to their success. So when you talk about making that investment and you're talking about, what it looks like, it's all those things, just like Dr. Burrows said, but it's also the organization and the leader's ability to leverage that to an opportunity to help the organization reach its full potential.
And so it sounds like, so inclusion, the next question I have written down was, the inclusion is the example of practicing diversity. Would you agree with that? That, because there are folks who, it seems, who value diversity, but may not truly be practicing diversity in their organizations. But is inclusion that?
So I would add that it is practicing the diversity in, I tell you what, let's not say practicing. Let's say we hire based on talent, skills, gifts, and abilities based on the requirements, right? I want to hire someone with your talents, bring you in. To practice would mean that I'm going to, that's all I'm doing is hiring. The inclusion piece is making sure that I'm hiring and keeping them actively involved, like Al said, integrating them in the decisions and the creativity and the innovation for 21st century workplace, right? And so no matter what industry you're in, and I know Sheila can speak to it from a nonprofit space, that inclusion is about education, not practice.
Sheila, would you agree with that point? Do you want to add something on this element?
Tawana pretty much defined exactly what, especially the new gen entrepreneurs are looking for, and new career professionals. They really need to be able to connect to the cause, to the mission and vision of the organization, because they are already, it's interesting, they're very much already equipped with their personal strengths and they know where they want to use them. So I think, as we transition into this new economy and new CEOs looking at their teams, they should really take this into consideration, because that's how they're going to get the best out of their new employees.
Right, I agree with that, Sheila. And so it's practicing inclusiveness, is practicing making sure you have a culture or organizational culture that's inclusive and where people feel like they belong, that they're seen and they're heard.
We're so many of these webinars I've been doing for over a year with NOVA EDA, the Northern Virginia Economic Development Alliance, which is the organizer of this series as well, and has been preoccupied with COVID, right? Because it looms large in our lives. And I'm curious about whether diversity has been impacted due to remote working or COVID-19 work conditions. Do we know, Tawana, if that's the case?
Well, research has not given us a peek into how COVID-19 has impacted our workforces. Like the research is still TBD, right? I can't wait till that happens, because I am a researcher and I love to know how what the studies are going to show or reveal. But I can tell you what my best guess or opinion is, right? Because my opinion is that COVID-19 or the pandemic has impacted many households. Obviously, people have lost their positions, that people are unemployed. There are some industries that have thrived and others that have been impacted, and then a lot of people are suffering. But I will say that I have noticed uniquely that because remote work is now an option, the hiring manager is looking for talent, untapped talent, in ways that they've never looked before, where the borders are no longer an issue, where I can hire a remote worker from other parts of the states, other states across the US, and I can call it an open marketplace to look for more candidates where relocating is not an issue. Because I can tell you a number of people from certain cultures, when we talk about diversity and why it matters, certain cultures would require people to stay co-located with family. So an opportunity to work for a particular company that's outside of my region would take me too far from family. That could cause cultural disruption in something that I value. And if I value my family and my home base, then I would not take an opportunity to work for someone outside of that region. However, having an open market would allow someone to be considered to stay home base, care for their loved ones, supply, support and nurturing that, family nucleus, and allow for that opportunity for professional aspirations. And so I think, in my opinion, what I have seen is, one, that open marketplace, more people being considered for those positions. I've also seen, not to ignore, that with the protests, the pandemic came also the protests that we have been seeing constantly and consistently for the last year. And so those two have been impacted the need to see representation in all types of industries, where commercials and a lot of messaging has now become the forefront of a lot of marketing, which has now also attracted more talent of diverse backgrounds, more talented, interested in working in those industries or for those brands, because they weren't sure if those brands were welcoming or if they even considered working there before. Now that their different positioning and different marketing messages, is something I may consider, so I will apply. And that matters a lot, John. And so I think I would submit that for your audience to consider, that as a leader in your organization, when you think about what it means to diversify, think about the cultural context, think about the opportunities, think about where you have limited yourself in hiring because you were concerned about certain challenges, and consider that if you take 2 steps outside of that center circle, how much more you will have access to in variety and talent and gifts.
Al, Sheila, did you have any thoughts on this as well regarding COVID-19? And as Tawana's, and I hadn't thought of that actually, is that you could source a more diverse workforce remotely for the variety of reasons that you just mentioned, and benefit your organization significantly. Al, Sheila?
I would like to echo, kind of piggyback first on what Dr. Burrows was saying related to, the stats aren't out on this yet. So this is basically strictly from my lived experience and my engagement with the companies that I'm working with. But as a result of COVID-19, we've noticed the redefining of essential versus non-essential workers and what they look like and what they bring to the table. And as a part of that process, with the employment going down, people were looking for jobs just to make ends meet. So I think there was value brought to removing some of the stigma behind some of these job opportunities out there that really opened some doors. I worked with a lot of clients that talked about having people at home being able to utilize their skill sets in other ways, and realigning and prioritizing work and finding value in. There was an old thing that, people need to be on site so that I know that they're working. And now there's going to be a paradigm shift once this ends, that we can still be successful working remotely. So I think that there were lessons to be learned from COVID-19 that aren't all bad. So I believe that there's opportunities to leverage that, especially in the DE&I arena. And I think we also talk about the piece, and we haven't brought up yet, is equity. And a lot of people interchange equality and equity, and they're very different. Equality is everybody has the exact same thing. Equity is that you're allowing people the resources and the opportunities to be engaged by making some type of accommodations or ensuring that they have a chance to be heard. So I think that there are some lessons that will be learned here moving forward. And I too am excited to see some of the data that comes out of this once all those smart statisticians put it together.
Exactly. I'm sorry, Sheila, did you want to jump in?
Well, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the culture of organizations. Now is the perfect time that I'm sure CEOs are looking at the culture of their organization and how they want to shift and how it aligns with their own values or their own mission and vision going forward. And so I think that during this time,
it's been really great to see organizations taking a look and seeing how they can really apply certain programs and provide opportunities for their employees to become leaders within their organization. So I've definitely seen that taking place.
And you mentioned the word programs. Just with Tawana, your organization does coaching and training and training of coaches. Is that correct?
We train leaders who want to acquire the coaching skill set because today the idea of 21st century leadership is to be an inclusive leader. And so our education programs are helping leaders who are on the front lines of change and global expansion, helping them to acquire these new skills so they can lead in the 21st century.
And so can you just give the audience some an example of some of the programs that you administer?
Right. So our clients contact us when they have an internal team, whether they are wanting to have an internal team of coaches that will make coaching available to employees at different levels of the organization for increased performance, increased engagement, and other measurable KPIs. We are also contacted when we are working with organizations who are interested in having diversity education, not training. So education is when we're looking at behavior and cultural shifts, right? So diversity education at different levels, from starting with training regarding emotional intelligence all the way through particular interest in microaggressions or some of the types of challenges that facing like systemic change. So we come in at various levels of organization for customized training, but our number one most what we call in-demand service is when we're providing coaches or training teams of coaches so that they can operate within our organization.
Great, great. Just to segue over to Al, as I noted at the top of this program on your biography, you spent most of your career in the U.S. Army National Guard, 28 years, educating and training leaders on diversity issues and team performance. What are some of the signs of good leadership in this context?
So, thank you for that question. And after 28 years, you have an opportunity to meet some very, I guess, pragmatic leaders, ones that you would want to follow. And when we talk about leaders, we talk about folks who have the technical and the tactical proficiencies to be able to accomplish what some folks may be the unaccomplishable. From my lived experience, I've worked with some great leaders, and then I've also had the other end of the spectrum. And one of the things that I looked at when I think about working with the great leaders, those were the leaders that were in tune with the people that worked for them. So, there's an old saying I used to share with leaders that were having challenges with, wanted to make sure they said all the right things. And that little saying is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And there's an opportunity to be impactful with a large group of people. Now, when we talk about inclusion or the lack thereof, and I'll start with the lack thereof, because when we talk about lack thereof, people have a tendency to vote with their feet. They leave the organization. There's another saying, people don't quit their jobs, they quit their supervisors. So, from an opportunity perspective, great leaders understand that I have to take the time and understand who I'm talking to, and everybody doesn't speak the same language, even though we all speak English. There's different ways to communicate. And those leaders with that level of emotional intelligence have the opportunity to engage and make a profound impact on all. Now, I've had some great leaders from the positive side who have said, I see great things in you, and they instilled in me a sense of value, purpose, and they made me feel safe. So when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, all those components are necessary, especially if you want to have people within your organization to be engaged. Now, the military still has a long way to go. Understand that no system is perfect. I think the military has, in some aspects, led the way, but in some aspects are still far behind. But that's speaking from a soldier's perspective. I'd like to ask Dr. Burrows her thoughts, because she's done some work with DoD as well.
No, I agree with you, Al. I think some of our clients, the United States Coast Guard, as well as the Army and the Navy, we have seen that, if you can recall, John, you may know this, how leadership was the model from the military historically, where we have used the military's leadership style and approach across industries, corporate industries, for many, many decades. And so they really did, carry the banner in that. Where we're noticing that they are coming up a little short is, again, that inclusion, the idea of leading inclusively. And we're going to continue to probably reiterate that, because it requires us to allow people to be seen and heard and being invited to have more engagement, right? And so, yes, other industries have mirrored the military, but now, and I'm really proud to say that with our work with the military, the other branches, we have seen tremendous strides in completing programs that allow those individuals to have impact within organizations who are inclusive leaders.
I'll send this question to Al, but it's all of you, all three of you. Tawana mentioned about checking boxes, so my question is, how do I know if an organization is merely checking boxes rather than enacting diversity, equality, and inclusion throughout the organization? It seems, as you said, Dr. Burrows, it's very easy to, people to address the things you see, right? But that doesn't mean you've made a change. So Al, I'm going to ask you to respond to that first.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because the things that we hold near and dear to our heart in terms of business owners is our ability to maintain staff and maintain relationships with our clients. And I think that for those who have that kind of checking the box, I kind of equate that to a fire and forget from a military perspective, or one and done, right? We're just going to have one day, we're going to sit down and talk about it. And to me, that kind of leads to a kind of what I call tone deaf. Organizations are not hearing the needs and the requirements of their people. They're also not understanding their client base. So when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's a holistic approach to how we do business. And it's not a standalone product. A lot of the folks say, well, I have my D&I plan over there on the shelf and it's a standalone, because that's what it does. It stands alone and it collects dust. So it's important to really integrate all this into the organizational strategy and not just have that standalone, because that's when you check the box and say, look, it's over there in the corner and I'm done. But I know Dr. Burrows has done a lot of work on this, and I'd like to hear what she would like to share, as well as Ms. Dixon.
Sheila, would you like to go first?
Sure. So, I completely agree with Al, and just through my experiences in my career, I have seen where people have just checked the box. And I do fit the skills, the talents, and all of those things. But again, when it comes to the emotional intelligence and connecting with the organization, those things really need to be heightened or taught. The other part of building a strong organization is looking at leadership styles. Like, everyone has their own leadership style, understanding what that is for your person that you're working with, understanding communication styles, so that when you can communicate and it is heard and responded to in a way that a person understands.
The question I have for Al, again, please, everybody jump in. And I know this question seems, obvious, but how does a business know it has a diversity problem?
And so that's a great question. Here's what most organizations don't know. They don't know how great they could be, right? And I look at the 3 Ps, and when I align work with companies, I look at profitability, productivity, and performance. And when I look at the profitability is about the revenue that you generate, but even more importantly, there's revenue in relationships. I think there's a value in having strong relationships, not only with your clients, but also with your team. The other thing in terms of productivity is how you do things. And I think COVID-19 again has taught us that we have to do things in a different way. And I know of a lot of companies that have said, I'm going to go ahead and relinquish my building lease because I don't need all that space. I don't need that overhead. I can have and be just as effective working from remote sites and having a smaller footprint. And then the other piece is about performance. Performance is related to people and right, and processes. So when we look at an organization and they're not able to keep up with those 3Ps, or they're losing clients, then you need to ask yourself, what are my other competitors doing? Why are they so effective? Why are they thriving in this time of uncertainty when I'm over here struggling? And so when you talk about people leaving your organization, when you talk about not being able to maintain clients, maybe there's an opportunity to reassess your diversity, equity, inclusion plan. And I'd like to hear from some of my other panelists on that as well.
I would like to add to that, Al, because it's important. I'm a fan of those 3Ps, right? So let's focus on profitability. So it doesn't matter the size of your company. You can be a small company. You can be, just a few, less than 10. The point is that research or the data shows that any company that has diversity, and this research started in 2014, it did most recent research in 2017, and I'm sure there'll be another one in this year in 2021. But in 2014, 15%, it was a 15% increase in profitability because of diversity. In 2017, it increased to 21%. And then it didn't matter the size of the organization, because when you're talking about productivity versus profitability, profitability increased because of diversity in the organization, where leaders were focused on making sure they had the diversity in talent and skills, and they were not limiting themselves to just people that looked like them or that were the same as they are, right? So again, diversity, if we keep it in mind, it's in anyone other than you, other than yourself. If you keep that in mind and look at the 3Ps, where that idea of productivity and profitability, that profitability piece, no matter how big your company is significant.
We heard Al, I think it was you or Dr. Burrows said, it was Al who said, oh, you could put the plant up on the shelf and it gathers dust. And instantly my mind goes to who owns the diversity, inclusion, equality program? Because I think typically a lot of companies would say that's an HR function, and then HR reports on it perhaps, versus the top drawer. Can you talk about that a bit? And what's the impact of a CEO owning the diversity element?
Well, number one, the CEO is as the head of the organization. If they're committed to it, then that makes it everybody else's priority, right? So whatever the boss says that this is where we're going, then that's what I guess the Army says, whatever they focus on is what we'll do. So when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's important to have the CEO engaged and actively participating in it. But I also wonder, sometimes it's also important for other people within the organization to have a good understanding and also to champion that. We talk about a 20-60-20 rule. 20% of the people, when you talk about getting folks to buy into diversity and inclusion, 20% of the people have a lived experience, and they say they're all in already. You don't have to sell them on it. Then you have 60% of the other folks who are, we can go either way. Just tell us what we want to do. We want to be, compliant, or we want to be engaged and involved. And then you have 20% that just like, I'm going down, kicking and screaming. There's no way you're going to pull me on this bus. So I would encourage organizations to focus on the 60%, because that's where you get your biggest return on investment. Now, in terms of HR, diversity, equity, and inclusion is not an HR function, right? It doesn't, again, they're partners in this process. I don't want to discount that piece, but diversity, equity, inclusion happens at the mid-level management, because when the CEO says it's important, the eyes and ears of the organization remain at the mid-level. So it's those mid-level managers that have to be, one, hold people accountable, set the standards, right, and reinforce the intent. And that means that organizational mid-level managers need to be intentional as it relates to their efforts to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I'd like to hear, some of my other panelists' thoughts.
No, Al, that is, I love what you said, because I had the opportunity to work for an organization where the CEO owned every part of the business and every part of the individuals who make up his business. And it was the most rewarding time, because he took the time to work with his managers, to work with his employees, to understand what they needed. And then they would put protocol in place. And that's how the organization obviously increase their profitability because they've got the people who are in their organizations who want to see it flourish, and they can also take ownership in it.
The next question I have here, in my own ignorance comes through because, and I knew this question was going to be like, pulling the pin in a hand grenade, because the question, it's aimed toward Al, please everybody. How does a business know it has arrived at achieving diversity? And I'm just waiting for it. So.
Well, it's funny you say that because I think that it's a continuous process. You continually assess and reassess yourselves. There's a saying that all great organizations or all great leaders reassess themselves to see where they're going and not to be complacent. So you can achieve improvements, but I think that you can do great things. I worked with a company, met with the CEO once who was just phenomenal. And you could tell that he understood and he bought in, but yet the next 2 levels down, they didn't get it. Right. So that process, people enjoy working at the organization, but you also have to make sure that everybody's on board. It's almost like a choir. The music sounds good when everybody's singing the same song, right? And everybody's on key. And sometimes you have folks off key, so you just say, I want you to sing so low that nobody can hear you, right? And we kind of make sure that we find a way to still help them be a part of the organization, but maybe they're just not in an active leadership role. So I would say that, the finish line is something that's kind of keeps moving. It's almost like that carrot, and the carrot keeps moving down the road. But, that's kind of my perspective. It's an ongoing process. I don't think you should ever be satisfied. I should think, did you make enough money as an organization? Were you more profitable? Is that going to be enough? And then once you get to a certain point, do you quit? No, you keep going because you still want to be competitive in your workplace. I defer to my other panelists for their thoughts.
I would add behind that, when it comes to whether if you are crossing the finish line, I like what Al is saying. In addition to that, I would say it's important to measure what's happening. So let's do some assessments. So if you have annual performance reviews, you should embed questions that are specific to corporate culture, like how is the organization performing? How do the people that are employed, how do they feel about being employed there regarding these very important topics? Without that data, you're just assuming as a leader that it's working. Your assumptions will lead you. Your opinions will lead you. And you are, again, you have blinders. We all have blinders when we're running these companies. We have our eyes on everything and we're still missing some details, right? So the point is that when you have an annual assessment just on performance, make sure the assessment includes measurements for those cultural questions regarding the organization. That will tell you every year if you've moved the needle. Okay, because if the leader is concerned, and again, this is a very important and authentic place to be. To be concerned if you moved or advanced the company forward in this area and you're measuring it by looking at the percentage or degree increase. Removing it 1 degree is wonderful, okay? So even if it's 1 degree in the right direction, fantastic, play full out, keep going. Don't consider just your opinion, introduce data, and that data will keep you moving in the right direction and it will keep you accountable, you and your leaders that you've hired.
Absolutely. And Tawana, I want to add to that, especially in this environment, you have to be agile and you have to be able to look at your employees. Here at the Chamber, we have membership. So my goal is to ensure my members are being addressed. So what does that mean? I have to get down on the ground with my members and understand where they are, where they want to go, what's lacking, and then be able to put programming in place or to connect with them so that we can continue to grow and bring opportunity to one another. So I totally agree with what you've said.
Yes.
Sheila, I'm glad you brought up the Chamber because I'd like to know more about the Chamber, its programs and activities. So if you could just give us a summary of that, it'd be great.
Sure. So we're working on professional development resources as well as advocacy and building community relationships for our members. So I've been at the chamber for a year now. We have tripled our membership, which has been really amazing to see. And I am happy to now be able to delve into our membership so that we can create and expand and be agile and put different things in place for the community to continue to grow.
And I'll just remind the audience that we are taking questions. So I said at the top, but I should have said it more frequently. So there are some questions coming in, which is fantastic. And we'll get to those in just a moment. Sheila, this episode is entitled How Diversity Makes Businesses Stronger. What would you define as a strong business from a chamber perspective?
Sure. It's looking at your foundations. And I think this goes along for all businesses. You have to have your plan, but it needs to be agile. Things change. So having an agile plan in place is important. Of course, you want to look at your finances, your marketing, sales, your management, looking at your leadership development within your organization, and also looking at your communication styles, I think is very important for strong companies.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, it's the Northern Virginia Black Chamber of Commerce. What are some of the biggest challenges that Black-owned businesses face?
In general, we were looking at access to capital. That has been something that has been an issue. And, as we approach COVID and going through all of the opportunities that are available for funding and things like that, we still had companies that were having issues with funding. And
even some of the federal programs.
Some of the federal programs.
Right. And
so many organizations, especially some of the smaller Black-owned businesses, they had to use their personal funds. The opportunities just weren't there. Now, as things are transitioning and changing, there are more opportunities for those business owners to have access to capital. But along with that, it's about building your business relationship with your banking institution. And I think, for a lot of Black businesses, they didn't have that. So hopefully now we're, moving in the right direction and people are getting the capital that they deserve, so they can sustain. Sustainability is the other piece of Black-owned businesses, being able to sustain the infrastructure of their industry, of their organization is what's important. The other topic we've seen is that it's access to contracting and becoming a prime contractor on an opportunity. Most of the Black-owned businesses are subcontractors, or they're just not in the running for the opportunity. So we will work as a chamber to ensure that we put some programming in place. It's been really amazing working with the NOVA Economic Development Alliance in order to put some of these things in place so that we can start excelling in the business community.
Sheila, your background before you arrived at the chamber was community engagement, youth activities. I think it was Loudoun County. I'm curious about the role that some of the business and government programs have in supporting communities. What have you observed?
So I've observed recently that more companies are looking at their diversity inclusion. They're looking at the markets that they're serving. Again, it's that relationship building that needs to take place. It's that understanding cultural values. It's understanding how a person connects. I speak from the nonprofit perspective because it's how a person connects to the cause that's going to be able to help them excel and meet whatever they're looking for in their mission and vision.
We have a few questions here, and I think what I'll do is, it's 1:45, so I'm going to segue over to some of these questions. So give me a second, folks, and I left my eyeglasses upstairs, so I'm going to do what I can. So if you're the panelists, if you read better than I do, please let me know. Here's one. Do you feel that companies are more consumed with hiring persons who fit their culture rather than hiring someone who adds to their culture? That's a good question.
That's a very good question. I'll take a first whack at it and then I'll toss it. Because culture conversations are typically a lot of what we do. I would tell you, yes, many people are hiring for cultural fit versus cultural add. Yes. And I would tell you that when you consider that every company will grow and outgrow certain belief systems, certain cultural dynamics, I will tell you that with growth and expansion as a company, you will, if you're hiring for fit culturally, those individuals may not fit in 5 years. They may not even fit within 3 years, right? So adding talent that is bringing value to what you do as a service provider or as a product developer in the space of creation, innovation, that is much more valuable than just saying, are you a good fit as far as personality is concerned? Are you a good fit? So Sheila had said something a minute ago regarding cultural values. So first of all, if you're going to discuss culture, as a leader, what are your cultural values in the company? I call them corporate values. What are your corporate values? And what values are integrated with culture? Okay, because in the early stages of a business, it is the leadership who created or started the business. It's your cultural values. It's your identity that's intertwined all over that organization, right? So as you move and as you evolve and you add more talent in the executive level, that's when culture shifts. That's why it's not good to hire for fit, but to hire for cultural add.
And
Sheila?
I like to add to that. One of the things that I always address when I work with companies is something called blind spots. And I often hear this term, we hire the most qualified person. And so when I sit down and we peel back that onion, right, and get to the lower layers, that they look for people who have had the same experience they have had, meaning that they had all the same type positions, they've had the same type of education, they've had all these developmental assignments, and they didn't really look at the scope of what they needed. They just followed the same old script. So when you talk about hiring for fit versus hiring for culture, I think, Dr. Burrows hit a home run on that response. But I just wanted for people to think about when they talk about hiring the best qualified candidate, we want to hire the person that's best going to help the organization. And they may come with a different set of skills beyond what you typically would hire for this, but they're the best fit because they bring new energy and innovation. So I just hopefully that you can keep that in mind as well.
Yes, Alan, I definitely agree with the innovation part when you tap into the cultural piece of an organization, because again, it's the strength of that person. It's how they're designed, right? It's their blueprint that you, as the CEO, get the pleasure of having in your organization, so that you can expand.
There's another question here. It's a comparative question, actually. And this individual asks about diversity and inclusion applying to large companies, and then asks, well, how about startups and small ones? And asks, should my first hire be looking for talent and diversity? So, so maybe you could, all of you can compare, contrast diversity within large corporations and diversity within small organizations. Is this more institutionalized on the larger side, or are there behavioral differences?
I would say that diversity, inclusion, whether you are a large organization or small, it doesn't matter the size of the business, that it is today based on the fact that, remember, our world, our entire world is now a open source, open market. That means there are no borders. People are hired across different continents. That means culture and diversity is very different than what it used to be. So it is not about the size of the organization. It's more so, do you want to win in this global market? Do you want to compete with, basically serve beyond the competitive edge where you're competing or out competing, those others that are in the same industry? If you're wanting to stay ahead of the competitive edge, then you definitely want to not consider the size of your organization, but the impact you want to have on what Al will go back to say, profitability and productivity, right? So we want to talk about those 3 Ps. Me on the profitability side, I'm really leaning on that because it doesn't matter the size of the organization. If you want to see that 21% growth, you want to consider diversity ASAP.
I couldn't have said it better. That was excellent. Thank you. Yeah.
So I think we're kind of running out of our time here. I've answered the questions that arrived. If anybody has any questions, it's your chance now to pop a question in. And I want to thank the panel for this really great discussion. And I'll tell the audience that this video will be on the novaeda.org website by tomorrow, let's say early afternoon. But also on the Arlington Economic Development site, where actually in both cases they have snippets, but also the full video. So I want to thank the panel very much for your participation here today, and thank the audience as well. Have a great afternoon, folks. Thanks.
Thank you.
See ya.